Welcome back. Thank you so much for tuning in. First of all, if you do not follow me now, if you have not subscribed, please do, okay? Because this is the place where I guide you and usher you into the new paradigm of Mother Earth, okay? Because things are shifting, frequencies are changing, okay? And you don't want to be left behind. So make sure you're on board. But anywho, if you don't know me, I am Akasha Divine, and this is part 2 of my Matriarchy series. So I have my notes here, and if you have not already, go ahead and watch part 1, which I define what a matriarchy is. I utilize criteria to determine whether a society is matriarchal or not. And it should be pretty clear what a matriarchy is. So in this video, I want to speak about if we are in a matriarchy, as in the United States. I know many people are watching from all over the world, and I can get to your country in another time, but as far as this particular country, these United States of America, right? Are we a matriarchy or a patriarchy? And the crazy thing about that is there is a discourse on whether we are, like, what type of social structure we have, okay? So some people argue and say that we have a patriarchy, right? And then some people feel like, oh, the patriarchy doesn't even exist, you know, that we're in a matriarchy, essentially, you know, because of the whole single mother epidemic that we have. And then there's some saying, well, you know, because we're Black, we're not a part of the patriarchy. So either way, some people truly believe the patriarchy doesn't exist, and we're essentially in a matriarchy because women dictate so much in our reality. You know, they tend to reference things like, well, our society is geared towards women. You know, the system is made to be against the man, you know, when it comes to divorce, when it comes to custody of children, when it comes to who gets in free at the clubs. These are the things that they cite, okay, to speak about whether we're in a matriarchy or not.
The patriarchy doesn't exist. The idea that men have created some kind of a social construct for the sole purpose of subjugating women is preposterous. It's very...
So, we shall see. So I'm going to go through evidence of what kind of political structure we have in this country. So I'm going to be utilizing the same criteria that I used in part 1. So if you do not know what, you know, matrilineal, patrilineal, matrifocal, if you don't know what these things mean, you would have to watch part 1 because that's where I define these terms. So I'm going to be utilizing the same criteria that I used to determine whether those societies were matriarchal or not, and use them for the United States. Part 1, we're going to be dealing with lineage. We're going to determine lineage. Lineage can be determined in 2 ways. One, by identity, the culture, how these people identify, and 2, by inheritance. Okay? So the reason why I am breaking it down in this way is because if you were to do any particular research, there is no consensus that would answer the question whether the United States is patrilineal or matrilineal. So we would have to determine based off of the actions and the culture that we embody and continue to perpetuate. So what do we do with our inheritance? What names are passed down? That would conclude identity as well as culture. How do people psychologically think of themselves when they're thinking about ancestry and family lineage? Like, how do they identify, whether it's with their father's line or their mother's line? So I want to start with the base argument that we are a matriarchy because of the single mother the abundance of single mothers that are leading households or heads of household in the Black community. My first question is, does the amount of single mothers in the Black community effectively make us a matriarchy? And I am starting with the Black community, and then we're going to broaden our understanding to the entire United States and all the people that's within it. So the real question is, how many single mothers do we really have for real? So in 2023, right, about 47% of Black mothers were single. And so this means that they were the sole parent living in a household with their children without a spouse. I'm not saying 47% of the Black community is single mothers, but what I'm saying is out of out of motherhood, 47% of those Black women who are single with children without a spouse are single mothers. Basically, that's 47%. So this doesn't include, Black lesbian women. It doesn't include Black single women, and it doesn't include Black married women who just don't have children. With that stat alone, right, we can't possibly be a matriarchy. Like, the Black community can be a matriarchy, the United States can be a matriarchy if we're going off of that stat alone, because it only emphasizes a small demographic of people. It does not include everybody. So, and it's less than half. 47% is less than 50%, right? So in order for there to be a matriarchy, we have to start looking at what is the majority. And we are not majority single mothers. Okay, so maybe the misconception, we kind of have to start switching our brains up of how we think about that. I think really and truly, what it really reveals, though, is the only condition by which a mother can be head of household. She can be head of household only in the absence of the male, right? So this is not women who are head of household who are married and their spouse is present. This is women who have children who don't have spouses present. So in his absence, she is head of household. But is she head of household when she has a present spouse? That's really the question. You know what I'm saying? And really and truly, what kind of mother would she be if she didn't take on a leader role, being that now she has a major responsibility of raising another human being or beings, right? You know, people speak about single mothers and how they're masculine and this and this and that, but how else is she supposed to act? You know what I'm saying? She is responsible for another life. Shouldn't she take on some leadership characteristics if she didn't have them prior to? I think people need to start thinking about that. Now we're moving on into part 2, which is, what percentage of the United States gives the children the mother's last name? So now we're moving into surnames, and we're moving into lineage, identity. General naming practice in the United States is for the fathers to pass their names down to the children. So about 95% of the United States population passes down the father's last name to the children. So they did a survey in April of 2025. So this is recent. This is a recent survey. And they surveyed 1,162 people. So, you know, over 1,000 people. And 52% of those feel the kids should get their father's last name, and only 4% felt that the children should get their mother's last name. Everyone else opted for the hyphenated married name. Research shows that even if a woman keeps her maiden name, 90% of the time she will still give her kid the father's name. So although there's no specific data 4, race. The vast majority of the United States children are given the father's last name. Only a small minority, less than 5%, receive their mother's last name. And I'm guessing that little bit of 5% is probably single mothers, most likely. Question number 3 that I asked is, what about inheritance? So now we're moving into inheritance. What is passed down, to the children? Legally, in the United States, inheritance is gender neutral. In all 50 mainland states, sons and daughters are equal heirs by default under intestacy laws. When someone dies without a will, courts are not allowed to favor one gender over the other. So that is legally. So that's the law. But what do people do in practice? Multiple studies show that family businesses are significantly more likely to be passed to sons rather than daughters. Sons are seen as natural successors, especially in agriculture, manufacturing, construction, trade, legacy. Only about 30% of businesses are passed to daughters, even when the daughters are equally qualified. Over 60% are passed to sons, and the remaining going to outside buyers or dissolving completely. In farming families, sons are 2 to 3 times more likely to inherit farmland or farming operations. So now we're looking at 2 different types of inheritance. So we have, the type of inheritance that goes to sons and the type of inheritance that goes to daughters. So we have the financial assets, so that's cash and stocks and things of that nature. That is pretty fairly evenly distributed between sons and daughters. When it comes to sentimental items like jewelry or photos, heirlooms, things like that, that's more often given to daughters. And when it comes to family businesses, land and farms, that is more often going to sons. And when it comes to family name and legacy, that is socially tracked through the sons. So when inheritance is tied to identity, continuity, it's more so going to go to the son because of how he's seen. He is seen like an heir. When it comes to daughters, they're not really seen as heirs. We already know the social impact of how people view sons versus how they view daughters. And this is very apparent when it comes to certain Asian countries where they actually had laws that would limit how many children they would have to a particular family. And it was a custom that they would actually, get rid of the daughters and keep the sons. I'm just not going to use the word, but that's what they did. So this was common across the planet for some time. The U.S. no longer enforces male inheritance by law, but it still overwhelmingly passes lineage, identity, and legacy through the sons in practice, which means patriarchal values still persist and operate even if the government does not intervene or push it. This gives us the perspective of the parents, like how the parents feel lineage should be passed down. And usually the parents, because of what we have discussed so far, identity and legacy should be through the male line, with women choosing to give their children the father's last name, and the parents in general choosing to give the bigger responsibilities or things that hold more weight and more value to the sons over the daughters, and the daughters just get more sentimental things. So when we really think about it, that gives us the perspective from how the parents see lineage, right? So I really want to discuss how do the children see, like, is it more progressive as time has gone on? So from the perspective of a child, that has grown into adult, right? Do they still hold these beliefs? Are they going to continue the practice of, viewing their sons in a certain kind of way versus their daughters? Are they going to continue to give their, businesses and generational wealth to their sons a little bit over their daughters? Or do they see things differently? And the way in which I wanted to understand this or look at or get an answer for that is based on how adults see themselves now today. And the best way to see how people self-identify is when it comes to the practice or the action of tracing family history. When you trace your family history, you are essentially saying, this is who I am, right? So I wanted to know, when people are looking back into their lineage, right? How do they identify culturally and symbolically? How am I going to trace my family back? Am I going to look through my mother's line and my mother's family? Do I more identify with my mom, or do I more identify with my father? Am I going to feel like his family history is my history, or am I going to feel like her family history is my history? And I'm not saying that people can't feel equally on both, right? But I really wanted to know, what is the first action that people do when they're trying to understand their ancestral heritage. In the United States, people overwhelmingly trace their lineage through their father's family. When they think about family history, ancestry, or heritage, they follow their father's line, unless the father is absent. And the reason why this is because when they start thinking about tracing their lineage or understanding their heritage a bit more, the first thing they do is follow their last name. Most genealogical and archives and tools and things of that nature is organized in a way that it emphasizes head of household. So you would have to utilize your last name to do your search. So not only do you have your last name from your father, but also property was passed through the male line as well, and also legal identity and citizenship. So women also tend to disappear from records because whenever they got married, they changed their name. So they usually disappeared. And I knew that because I decided to do the research and follow my family line and create a family tree, and I wanted to follow my mother's line, and I realized that it was very difficult because the names kept changing. So whenever I found a marriage certificate, I was able to know where she changed her name from, but also I hit a wall because I don't know her previous name. Like, you know what I'm saying? So it's highly frustrating when you're trying to follow your family history through census records, marriage, birth, and death certificates, and you hit a wall because women tend, their identity is based upon their husband. So the tools themselves make it much easier for you to follow your father's line because everything is about that last name. When Americans trace their family history, they rely on documents and records that are organized patriarchally. According to the U.S. Census Historical Archives, for centuries, the head of household was recorded as father. The Social Security Administration's surname data shows children are significantly more likely to inherit from fathers. Family business research shows sons are significantly more likely to inherit a business over daughters. And the USDA agricultural data shows farms are more often passed to sons. We're on to the second criteria, okay? Locality. Are we patrilocal or matrilocal? And if you don't remember or you didn't watch the first part, but this would mean that after marriage, the husband or wife would move to either or's family, clan, or village because that particular family was centered. So in order to determine if we, the United States, is either patrilocal or matrilocal, what we would be looking for is, after marriage, do the married couple move in with which in-laws? Do they move in with the husband's parents, or do they move in with the parents of the wife? Also, how is the family residence passed down? So is this house a new house, or did this house come from his family, or did it come from her family? So, whenever people pass down family homes and things like that, we need to know where the residents came from. So the U.S. tracks housing composition and multi-generational living arrangements. And what they have come up with is that there is no overwhelming pattern that people move in with either side, either gender's family. But studies show that married couples are statistically more likely to live in their own households. So usually when people get married, they just get a new house together, separate from either side of in-laws. And those who do live with, their parents, in-laws, like multi-generational living, when it comes to having the parents, the married couple, and their children, that's multi-generational. It doesn't favor either side of the family. It's usually done because of economic reasons, the ability to give care, you know what I'm saying, for the older generation, or cultural reasons. So that would be more dominant in immigrant families who still practice living with the extended family. So what we have learned so far is that the U.S. is patrilineal, but when it comes to locality, the U.S. is neither patrilocal or matrilocal. But what they are is functioning nuclear. So the married couple would move independently and separately and create their own nuclear family. So what I want to do is I want to dive deeper into the nuclear family unit, because this is a major part of the American dream, right? Husband, wife, house with a picket fence and a dog, 2 kids. Like, you know what I'm saying? This is, the American dream. So I really want to dig into this nuclear family model, because I think on the surface it looks as if power is equal or shared in a certain type of way. But again, I want to follow the evidence of the patterns, right, of how we structurally act, rather than the surface level of what it looks like. I'm going to ask 5 things, okay? Is the nuclear family natural? When did the nuclear family come into play? Why do we have a nuclear family model in the first place? And how does it function? Question number 1, is the nuclear family model natural? Across pre-colonial, pre-industrial societies, they practiced or were based upon villages, clans, tribes, right? Children were raised communally. Households were extended families. So you had mama, grandmama, aunties, uncles, cousins, and children all residing in the same place or living adjacently, right? So you should be able to not only come out of your particular dwelling, but a few steps away, you to be able to go see your aunt or your grandmother over there or your uncle over there. Like, you know what I'm saying? It was communal. And when people got married, they would live within that small faction of the clan dwelling, whether the clan lived in one big long house or if the clan lived in a circle with it, where there being a bunch of different little houses, bungalows, whatever you want to call it, right? And you would live in that particular family. So it would be something where it would be either going towards the father's clan and village or going towards the mother's clan and village, and you would not really be living separately from those people. This was common in not only with the indigenous in the North Americas, but also in African society and Asian clan society, and even Pacific Islanders, and even Europe, in peasant feudal Europe, right? They always had households with extended family. They would have their grandma and all of them in there together. So even if you were to say, oh, this is a European concept, really and truly is not. It's a fairly modern concept, because even in Europe, people lived together. Certain anthropologists, what's his name, Claude Levi-Strauss, right? Marshall Solins and Sylvia Yanagasaka. Hopefully I'm saying it correctly. They have shown that nuclear families become dominant only under specific conditions, both economic and political. On to the second question, when did the nuclear family come into play? If it's not something that is ancient or natural or something that the entire world did. Why is it that it only happens under certain conditions? So I have a chart here, me and my little charts. So we're going to be looking at different eras of the United States. Pre-1600, okay? It was about clans and extended households. Once we get to 1600 to 1800, that's when we start seeing a transitional period, okay? So after the Protestant Reformation, so the Protestant Reformation was between 1517 and 1648. And then we have the rise of capitalism, post-war, 1812. So that's 1865 to 1950. So between 1800s and 1950, that is when the nuclear family becomes idealized. And it doesn't become normalized and preferred until after World War II. So that would be around the same time that urbanization and wage labor came into play, around the mid to late 1800s. And the modern idea of a nation state came into play as well between the 17th and 18th centuries. So the nuclear family only is seen in societies that experience capitalism, land privatization, after colonial reconstruction. So once the economy changes and the politics start changing, where now people have to start relying on wage labor instead of being self-sufficient, now we start to see nuclear families come into play. Number 3, why was the nuclear family put into practice? Why was it needed? All that good stuff. So number 1, the biggest thing is that it isolates women. When you are living in a clan or a village or a tribe, there is something called communal support. So more people are present to hold certain individuals accountable to their behavior, and whether they are handling their responsibilities or not. And when you isolate a woman from her support system, as in her aunts, her uncles, her sisters, her cousins, her uncles, whomever it is, you now have control over your own small unit. This also privatizes reproduction. So back when children were taken care of communally, this is why we have the African proverb that it takes a village to raise a child. We have abandoned that to where children are now the sole responsibility. The child rearing is now the sole responsibility of that woman. People would say of the married couple, but we do know that when it comes to the nuclear family and how it works, the woman is the one that rears the child while the man goes to work. So therefore, the weight of rearing a child, of raising a child, isn't really on the father. The father usually plays with the child. You know, special occasions. But when it comes to actually raising the child, that is heavily on the mother. She's the one that cooks, washes them, teaches them, you know, potty trains them, dresses them, you know, goes to school to make sure they're doing well, takes them to the doctor, does all the things. So it's not an equal split of the child rearing when it comes to that nuclear family. It really is on that woman, where in ancient times it was more on the extended family. So it wouldn't be on just her by herself, but it would be on everybody. So aunties, uncles, cousins, grandmas, grandpas, everybody would pitch into the raising of that child and make sure that they grow up to be a, you know, a good citizen, a good adult. Because of this isolation, right, it makes the man the head of a contained unit. So now he's in control over many different aspects in which were functional really without his presence. So now he has to, you know, be the head of household and make sure that everything happens within that space while she's isolated. So, you know, and because of this, now that there's no family, that also means that there is nobody there to produce. So therefore, this family, this nuclear family, is now dependent on wage labor. So back when there were clans, villages, and tribes, they either were a hunter-gatherer society or they farmed. A couple with children farming and producing all of their foods and goods is not sustainable. So now we have, remember, the urbanization happened. So now we have factories and steam machines that can do things that people once was able to do. So this is a change in the entire society that would create the environment for a nuclear family. So most of the production is outside of the home rather than in the place where they dwell. Now we're going into question number 4. Was the nuclear family enforced, or did this happen just naturally because of urbanization, right? Colonial and modern government actually outlawed communal land holdings. They imposed private property and they forced people into wage labor, as in working into factories. They actually criminalized alternative kinship systems. This would include things like polygamy, which is why if you've ever done the research, you would know that polygamy was outlawed in the late 1800s. And I'm not just talking about the United States here. This was all over the world, to be honest. But around 1865, that is when polygamy is all of a sudden illegal in the United States. And they call it bigamy. So you cannot marry more than one person as you are already married. So monogamy was a political faction. Also, indigenous peoples were given Christianity or Abrahamic religions in general. So the natural spiritual systems and spirituality that indigenous people had, they had to get rid of that. And they had to adopt a whole new religion, which would give you all the new psychological understanding of how life is going to be, you know? They took children and put them in nuclear units and adoptive and foster homes. So if you really think about it, the foster system didn't exist back when we had clans and villages and tribes, because the community took care of the child. So it would be better handled if a child was unruly, or if a parent was less equipped to take care of a child. Let's just say, one of the parents, the mother has a mental illness. There is so many other people that would be able to step in and help that child if the mother can't. You know what I'm saying? If the mother can't be at her highest capacity for that child. There was no such thing as a foster system, and there was no such thing as, boarding schools or summer camps or the adoption agency. Like all of that is new. All of that is new. So all of that was put into play to, first they separate the support system from the women having children. And then now the women having children are either killing themselves to take care of those children, or those children end up owned by the state. And now they're in other facilities so that they can be industrialized. So they rewrote family law, marriage law, inheritance law. They rewrote everything. The nuclear family unit wasn't something that was naturally chosen or just an elevation of tribalhood. You know what I'm saying? It was something that was politically installed into a society, just as the religion was also enforced, just as working in a particular system is enforced, like outsourcing production and making people go out of their home to work so that they can have their basic necessities. All of that came together as like a package. So now we're on to question number 5. How does the nuclear family function? It governs labor, reproduction, inheritance, property, sexuality, and gender obedience. So it is not a family model. It's more of a small unit of government. So it's the smallest administrative unit of the patriarchy. With everything that we learned today, we have learned that legally, just looking at the laws, looking at the surface, it would seem as though there is no bias, and that when it comes to lineage, inheritance, all children can be equal heirs of any inheritance. But if we look at practice, we see that sons are preferred over daughters when it comes to identity, family legacy, and continuity. Okay? When we look at locality, legally, we do not see married couples moving in with the in-laws of either spouse. But we do see that we are what you would call neo-local, as in the married couple would move in a separate and independent home to form a nuclear structure. And in this nuclear structure, as we have identified how it functions, what we have discovered is the third characteristic of determining whether the United States is patriarchy or matriarchy. And the last characteristic is focal. What we are socially centered around. Are we centered around the mother? Are we centered around the father? And because they decided to separate and live in a new household, separate from in-laws, and form this nuclear family unit, what we have discovered by answering one question, we answer the next one, which is that we are patrifocal. Because it would be different if this nuclear family was equal in power. But because this nuclear family places the husband above the wife and all of the children, right? Where his name is given to all that he owns. Yes, the wife and the children are people that he owns. And when it comes to business, legacy, inheritance, all of that is more likely going to go to the son over the daughter. What we see is that that man, that husband, is centered in that family dynamic. It's not his father or his grandfather that's centered, but it is him that is centered. And that's what we see. And I think when we look into different anthropological studies, when we are determining whether a society is patrilocal, we are looking at, whether, everything is centered around the husband's family, right? Around his lineage. But in this new day and age, when it comes to how we are living in a more modern day, after urbanization, after World War II, after capitalism comes into play, after all these things, after we also get new religions and things of that nature, we see that it's no longer about the father, but about the man. Does that make sense? So it's not about, Big Papa being centered in his ideals and things like that. It's about the current man. You know what I'm saying? The current man. And this is something that's passed through generations. So the patriarch isn't always the oldest man or the wisest oldest man. It is the current man. So as soon as that boy becomes a man, he becomes a patriarch. He becomes head of household. As soon as he moves out of his parents' house and he has an apartment and then he gets his little girlfriend to come stay with him, he's head of house. He's a king of his castle. As soon as they start having kids, he is that. Whether he exudes wisdom, clarity, vision, it doesn't matter. You know what I'm saying? So if we are to determine whether the United States is patriarchy or a matriarchy, what we have discovered today, I think, puts us more in line with a patriarchy than anything else. But I'll let you guys let me know what you think in the comments. If you disagree, I want you to state the reason why. Don't just be like, oh no, that doesn't make sense. I disagree. Make sure you are putting your reason as to why you disagree so that we can discuss it. Because I'm always going to come to you with facts, just like I came to you today with my findings, not just my feelings, okay? And then we can continue to talk about it. So stay tuned for part 3 of this series. And I look forward to it. Thank you so much for coming and spending time with me and, learning, okay? Learning about what type of society we live in, okay? Remember, much love. Remember to worship the Yoni.